I'm going to demonstrate several methods for creating and using PODs, those plain old data structures. This is among the most simple classes that we can create. To start with, a POD is a non-tangible object. That means you can't see the POD object, but you can see the code or the class used to generate it. You know it's present when you can implement it and test it. First, we'll build an object external to the project. Then we'll do an internal class. This is similar to HTML and CSS. If you embed cascading style sheets in a web page, it's only usable on that web page. But if you have an external style sheet, it's usable among all your web pages. So if I have an external class, it can be used by any source. But if I embed that class in a project, it's only usable in that project. Also, I'll initially show you the accepted object-oriented programming method for creating and editing classes the long way. And at the end, I'll show you a Microsoft shortcut as well. And as always, I will show you the builder tools that you can use that will assist you in creating a class. But again, you're only going to use the builder tools because it helps you do the work faster, not because it does the work for you. You need to understand exactly what it's doing. So let's go ahead and get started and try this out. I'm going to create a new project, but it's going to be a little bit different this time. This time I'm going to create what's called a simple class library. So I've selected Windows, I've selected a class library, and you're going to find that this class library exists in all the different technologies out there. I can write the class library in BASIC, I could write it in F# if I wanted to, but of course this is a C# class, so we're going to stick with C#. On this POD that we're going to create right now, let's imagine that we're going to track pets that might be inside of a animal shelter. I'm going to call it my pets class. We'll call it pets. And I'm going to go ahead and click OK. What it's going to do, it's going to build a basic structure, but it's going to be much different than we were dealing with a desktop app. And in fact, what we end up right now with is just this code right here. Notice that the outside of it says that the namespace here is pets, and right now it says the name of what I'm creating, the class, is called class 1. Notice that that class 1 matches the class 1 over here. Now I could change the name of the class 1 right here, but that's not the proper way to do it. It would get confusing. What I want to do is come back over here, and I'm going to change the name of this guy to be Pet Info. Right there. Pet Info. So I'm doing it within the Solution Explorer. Now as soon as I click out of it, watch what happens. It's going to come back and ask me if I want to rename my class over here the same. And we do. We want both of these to match. So I'm going to say yes. So the class that I'm creating is this piece right here. The namespace is this. So later when I want to implement this class, it's going to be called pets.petinfo. And I might have another class down here as well. I can have more than one class. So perhaps in here I might have a class that has dog information and maybe another one for cat information, and there's totally separate classes, but they're going to be in the package called pets. Now that's very similar to this. This package is what the equivalent of this would be. Inside of this package that we see here would be different classes, one or more classes, and this is the part that we would be looking at inside of this structure. So let's go ahead and continue on. What we want to do is we're going to track some information on a dog. So we'll do something like this. I'm going to go ahead and comments here. Oops. Let me try this again here. Let's go ahead and we're going to track the dog's name. Let's start with owner name. And I'm just brainstorming this right now. So I want to put owner name in here. I want to track the dog name. I want to track the owner's address. I'll track the city. In fact, let's not track the city. Let's just track the zip, because I can look up the city and state as we've looked at in past lectures. So I'll track the zip, and let me correct the dog name here. We'll track the sex of the dog, and we'll keep it simple right now. The breed of the dog, and then we'll track a license, if the dog has a license or not. So that's the basic information that we're going to be tracking. I'm going to make sure that's a comment right there, and we're going to create a property for each one of those. So to start with, the initial thing that I need to do is I'm going to create what we call getters and setters. A getter and a setter. A get is used And think of this from the perspective of the user. A get to the user says, give me the information back, whereas a setter says, I want to set the information initially. So what I start out with at the very beginning is the keyword public, because my properties are going to be public. I then follow it with the data type that I want. So in this particular case, owner name is going to be of type string. So I'm going to type in string, and then the name of the data type, or at least the name of the property that I want to use. So in this case, we'll do DogName as such. Now underneath that, I'm going to put some brackets in here. As of this point right now, it appears right now that we're dealing with simply a variable. But these brackets down below it are going to change things just a little bit. So within the brackets, I'm going to create two sections. I'm going to create what we call a get section. Oops, let's try that again. A get section. And then I want to create underneath that a set section. Just as such. Just like that. Now, what I have to do, and let's make this clear, that DogName is the property, but internally I'm not going to use DogName. And right now I'm using the standard OOP principles. So what I have to do now is I'm going to create what we call helper variables. Think of this property as a portal that gets into this class. It's just going to pass information through DogName, but DogName is a whole per se inside of our class. I need to catch DogName into a variable. So it's going to be a variable that always deals with that. And that variable is going to be a private variable. It doesn't need to be public. Nobody needs to see this variable on the outside. And by default, variables will be private, although I could put the word private in front of it. But I'm going to create a variable that's going to hold the dog name. Now, there's a variety of different techniques to give variable names to helper variables. By the way, these are also called fields. One method would be to use an underscore and the same as the property name. So I could do something like DogName. That's one method. Another method would be to just simply have your properties uppercase and your helper variables lowercase. We're just looking for a consistency or standard. Another way to do it, I've seen before, would be to put an O in front of it and it have DogName spelled out. In my case, I think what I'm going to do is just leave it as an O in front of it. You'll find out when you get into a development environment, either your team leader is going to tell you how to do that, or you on your own, if it's your project, you'll come up with a standard and you're going to stick with that standard. So here's my variable name that I've just created now for DogName, and I better give it a variable data type in front of it. Now, keep in mind that this keyword private right here is not required. Variables that are created are automatically private. I'm just making sure here by putting private in, but it's not necessary. This would have done exactly the same thing. Okay. Now I've got my getters and setters down below. If somebody comes back in and they ask and they say, I want to know what the value of the DogName property is, what I'm going to do to them is I'm going to return to the user OldDogName. Just like that. So internally, my entire program is going to work with the variable OldDogName. If I've got this business object later, it's going to be dealing with OldDogName. But I'm going to use this property just as a method for getting to OldDogName and passing data back and forth, and the user's going to see it as DogName. That's public. But again, keep in mind this is private. They could never ask what is OldDogName equal to. So this is the getter right here. From the user standpoint, they want to know what is OldDogName equal to. Now, on the setter, it's a little bit different. On the setter, I'm trying to establish or put a value into OldDogName. So that's what I'm going to do right here. I'm going to say OldDogName is now going to be equal to. Now, let's pause for a second. The user is going to be using this program, and they're going to do something like, and let me just over here in a comment format. They're going to do something like my dog dot DogName is equal to Fido. Something like that. So Fido is going to be passed into, and DogName is misspelled here. Fido is going to be passed into DogName, and we have to make that value move into DogName. So what this is going to actually do, I'm taking this out, that's the implementation of it, is I need to put the keyword value here. That means that any value that's passed in is going to go into DogName. And this is my basic object right now, folks. This is all I really need to do. That would be a complete object. I've got one property in here. I still need to add the properties for address, zip, sex, breed, and license. Let's go ahead and add one more in, and then I'm going to show you how to use a builder tool. I know I'm going to create DogName next. Let's create a variable, and we're going to call that OldDogName. Not OldDogName, owner name. I did this backwards. Let's try that. Owner name next. Like that. There we go. Now, make things a little simpler. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to come down below here. I'm going to paste it in here and change this to owner name. Owner, and then owner. And now I have two properties. I've got an object created, or excuse me, a class created, and that class it's created is called petinfo. And then petinfo.dogname, I've got petinfo.ownername right now. And I have those others that I want to add in here. Zip, sex, breed, and license. So at this point you could go down through here just like I did and add all those properties in. But before we go on, I just want to review one thing, and then I'm going to show you the builder. The getter right here says the user wants to know what the value is. If I came back and I said, what is in textName.text, it's going to return back to me the value that's in the .text property. Right? This is the equivalent of it. This is on the other end how it would be dealing with that. If I want to set the value of a property, then I would use a setter. And this sets the value, and you're always going to use the value keyword here because that is the value that's being set in or passed in to it. So keep that in mind. Now, what I want to do next is show you how to use a builder that's going to help you with this. And it's a really weird tool. So what I do is I'm going to go back out here to my project. I'm going to do a right click on my project. I'm going to add in a new item, and that new item is going to be strange because every other item that we have within our tools over here, pet info, their elements are going to be in my project when it's compiled. This guy acts that way, but he's not. I'm going to come down here, I'm going to add in this feature. It's called a class diagram. I'm just going to add it in, and as soon as I add that class diagram in, it's going to give me a builder tool. Now the strange thing about it is, you notice here's my class diagram right here. I can delete that class diagram out at any time and it will not impact my program. It's just giving me a tool for building and working on my classes. So let me close references down. Now what I can do is, here's my class that I'm working on right here. Here's my diagram. I'm going to grab this class right here. I'm going to drag it over onto this builder and let up on it. And you'll notice now that it sees the two properties that I just added in. There's DogName and there's owner name. Notice up here I have my OldDogName and my owner name. Those are the same things that we have over here right now. This is graphically represented right here. Now I want to go back in and let's take a look at the next one that we're going to add in. We're going to add in an address field here. So we're going to come back to the builder, and this time we're going to do things a little different. I'm going to do a right click on the builder. I'm going to add in a property. It asks me what's the property name, so I'm going to add address here. And then I need to come back over to my properties window, and by default my property is an integer. I don't want it as an integer, so I have to type out string right here. Okay. And notice my accessor here is public. You don't want to change that. You'll never have a property that's private. Now I changed that to string, and I've got that property built. I do not have a helper field yet for it. So let's do that. Let's come back over here. Let's add in a field. And this time our field will be called OAddress. And the same thing holds true. We're going to jump down to OAddress here, and we're going to make that guy a type string. I haven't saved anything. I've done nothing. Let's jump back over to our pet. And now notice what it's done here. It's now gone back in and it's added in my getter and setter. It didn't add the code in between it for me, but it's also come back in and added in my helper variable up here, my field. So all I need to do now under address is to come back over here and add in my return. And I should get IntelliSense now when I do O address. And my setter will say O address is going to be equal to value. It's like that. And I have my third property created. And let's come back over here now and let's go to the diagrammer, and I have to add in zip. So let's add in zip. Zip will also be of type char, or string I should say. And then I'm going to add in my field. And that will be O zip. And that will also be of type string. And jump back over to our code again and make sure it added it in correctly. It did. There's my zip property, address, owner name, and dog name. So next thing I have to do is complete the getter. So this getter is going to say return OZip. And the setter is going to say OZip is equal to value. And then the last two that we have to do, actually the last three, we'll do sex and breed. Sex, breed, and license. So let's do all those together. Add a property, sex, of type string. Add in a property, breed, also of type string. So I got sex, breed, and then we add in license. Oops, right here. Add property, and that will be license. And let's assume that license is an integer. We'll leave that as an integer right now. That's a license number at that point. So we got to go back in and now add in our fields or our helper variables. So we'll go down the list here, breed, breed. That's going to be of type string. The right hand side. We have to add in another helper variable here, and that will be zip. Let's see, I've already got zip, so let me see which ones am I missing here. I've got owner name, I've got address, I've got breed, I've got dog name. I need to add in license, owner name. I need to add in license, sex, license and sex. So let's add those. Oops, right here, add field. License. And that's going to be of type integer. And that would be sex. Sex. And that would be of type string. Okay. So now our object is built. Let's come back and take a look at it. There's all of our helper variables. All of them are private. All of those are internal. And if you look down through the list here, you'll see I have all my fields created. All I got to do is finish the coding on them. So let's do that right here. Oh, by the way, this throw generates an error. So the purpose of it is that it lets me compile it without causing an error. Otherwise, with nothing in the getter, we would get an error. So it's kind of like a little fail-safe they throw in, but we don't want to leave it there anyway. So when somebody wants to ask, or somebody asks what the value of sex is, we're going to return sex. And we're going to say sex is equal to value. And then we're going to jump down here and we'll do breed. So we're going to return, breed, and we'll set breed is equal to value. Return O license, and then the very last one is O license is going to be equal to value. And that should produce our entire object that we want. So next thing I've got, if everything's correct, I want to go ahead and try a build on it. So I'm going to build a solution. Notice that there's no run option up here. There's nothing to run. So as the build goes on, what it's going to do is it's going to produce for me a dynamic link library, a DLL, and then I can use that DLL, as we'll see here in a couple of minutes, in other programs. And while this is working here, I'm going to start another instance of Visual Studio. Now the build is done, and notice what it did. It tells me where it stored my file. Now I defaulted mine into my Visual Studio project file, so it says right here it created a dynamic link library for me called pets.dll, and it tells me right here what my path is to that location. So let me go ahead and see if I can get to that location real quickly here, and I'll show you what it looks like. So by the magic of speed, I've jumped over into the folder where my projects are. So notice it's in my Visual Studio 2015 folder by default projects, and there's pets right there. So let's go ahead and open up pets. And inside pets, you're going to see my standard solution file as we've done before. And I go into pets a little bit deeper. A little bit of delay there. And into the bin folder. And into my debug folder. And there is my tools right there, my pets.dll, or in this case, this is going to be my plain old data, my POD. So our next step now is to go ahead and utilize that POD. So I'm now back at an empty Visual Studio page. I'm going to create a new desktop application. New project, Windows, Windows Form, and let's see, we're going to call this in demo POD here, in my case, and go ahead and click OK. Now, for the sake of time, what I'm not going to do is go back in and create a really large application here. I just want to demonstrate how this works. So initially, what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw a button here. I'm going to grab several text boxes. Let's start with one here. So I'll grab one text box, and I'm going to copy that down. I think I had, what, 6 pieces of data, so let's do that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we'll put these back in order here. And what I like to do is I'm going to type some values in here. I'm going to place those values into my POD, and then I'm going to come back and let's grab another text box here. I'm going to put this text box down here, another button. We'll take that text box and we're going to make it multi-line. There we go. And what I like to do then is to prove this button will add these guys into a POD, and then this button will read the POD and put the values back into this multi-line text box right here. So let me just clean just a little bit of it up just to make it a little bit more readable. So I'm just going to, on that button, I'm going to put add, and I'll call it button add. On that button, I'm going to call that one, oops, I put them backwards, didn't I? Add, yep, so let's change that. I had the wrong button. I want to add those. And then on this one, I'll call this one button show. just to prove it. So again, at this point, I click on this, whatever values I have, it's going to add it into my POD, and then when I click here, it's going to read the POD and put it over here. Normally, we'd probably transfer it to a different form as opposed to the same form, but this will work and this will demonstrate. So what I need to do right now is I'm going to put some code behind this add button here. I need now, and this is something new to us, normally in the code behind, everything we drag onto a form is instantiated. Now what we have to do is we have to instantiate the object ourselves, and in order to do that, I need to add a reference to that object. That object is not included in here right now, so where that object came from was right here, this location right here. So I'm going to have to go to that particular location, find that object, that DLL, and add it into my project. So let's do that. Do a right click, add reference. I'm now going to browse. It's going to open up the dialog for me to browse through. And now what I need to do is to go to my documents, 2015, projects. There is my pets right there. Go into pets, go into bin, into debug, and there's my DLL. That's my tools. So I'm going to double click it and then click OK. And you'll see now that it's added pets over here within my references. Now I need to have access to pets in a variety of places. I can populate pets here, but what I need to do is instantiate it. If I instantiate it here, it's only going to be alive within these brackets. So this is an example of an instantiation that's going to have to be done at class level. So watch what I do here. I'm going to start off with the namespace that we had. So if we go back over to the object, remember that our namespace here is pet info. So that's what I'm going to type in here. I'm going to type in pets.petinfo is equal to, and now I'm going to do new and pets.petinfo. See if that's going to work for me. Oh, and one thing I forgot to do is give it the name. So I'm going to, right after this, I'm going to call it my pet. So now what this does is instantiate. So let's break this apart. What this statement says right here is it says set aside enough memory to store my pet, and it looks at pet info and sets aside the memory required to do that. That's very similar to something like this. Right there. This part, this is the variable name, this is the data type. This is the variable name, this is the data type. But this sets the value initially to null or 0. This guy just sets memory aside, that's all he does. By me adding this piece at the end, what I'm telling it to do is to go back out to my original class and include all properties and methods. Don't just set aside the memory, but include all properties and all methods. This right here is referred to as a constructor. We're going to be talking about that in a minute, but for right now, we're going to leave it empty. So what it's telling me now is my pet is going to be available throughout my entire application. So I've got these text boxes in here. Hopefully I did these right. Text 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Right there. Let's go back in and populate. Let's assume that data is filled in here. We've hit the add button, and now we want to move all this data into that POD. So how do we do that? We've clicked the button. We've got the POD in memory. So now, watch how simple this is. My pet dot, and look at all the different properties that are popping up in here. Okay, I can come back in here and let's assume that we're just going to go down top to bottom. So I've got the owner name, pet.owner name, which is type string, so I can simply plug directly into there whatever's into that text box1.text. Just like that. And then I can go down through the list here, and because I'm lazy, I'm going to do this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm going to change this to 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, just like that. And then over here I need to change the different properties. So I got owner name, we'll do pet name right here, dog name I should say. Then I have address. Then I have my zip code property. Then I have my, let's see, sex. And let's see, how many objects did we have over here? We had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I need to add my license. So I got owner name, we'll do license right here. That's license. And IntelliSense should help me out here. For us slow typists, something like that. Uh-oh, and there is no text box 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What is the sixth one called here? Text box 6. So why am I getting that error? Well, if I look at license, I know that license is of type integer. This is of type string. So if I'm going to move that across, I'm going to need to cast it. Just like that. Because it's got to, I'm comparing apples to oranges, and I need to compare apples to apples. So if this is going to be of type integer, this has to be of type integer when it moves across. There we go. So at that point now, I should have filled everything in. Let's prove that this is working. What I'm going to do is put a stop right here. I'm going to go back and run the program. And I probably should put label captions on it. But just to prove it's working, let's just put some letters in here. A, B, C, D, E, and F. And then hit add. Oh, never got to that. Look, here I did. I got to that line, and there's an error in here. Oh, and why did I get an error? Because I tried to put an F in that last one. Can't do that. So let's try that again. We'll rerun it. So I can do A, B, C, D, E, and this one's going to have to be numeric, 55. Click add. Now we get down to that bottom line. Let's go back in and take a look at what my pet is. Now watch this. If I take my pet and I point to owner name, it's going to tell me there's an A, there's a B, there's a C. But I could also grab my pet and drag it down to my watch window down below, or right click on it and add to watch. And now if I open up my pet down here, there's all my values in here. Tells you all the different values that were put inside. Although how come it says breed is not filled in? I did not do a breed. So I skipped right over breed up here. That was what my issue is. We'll leave it as it is right now. I could add another text box in here. Something like this. The challenge is that text box is 7. This one is 6. Which means this one's going to skip a number. So I have to go back. I should have named them correctly to begin with. And now, if I'm going to populate this, I'm going to say my pet dot breed is going to be equal to text box. So it's 6, 7, 8, text box 8 dot text. There we go. That corrects that missing piece of data that I had out there. So you see how all the data is in here. Now the next thing I'd like to do is I simply want to print that data out within that window just to prove that it's being printed out. So let's go ahead and put code behind the show method here. And since I've only got one item in here, what I could do is I could simply say text box, and that's 7 dot text is equal to, and inside here I'm going to do my pet, and let's just do it down the list just like we have it up above here. So my pet dot owner name goes in there. And then what I want to do is I'm going to add to it an environment dot new line, And then I'm going to add into it after that text box. Well, we're not doing text box here. What am I thinking? I'm going to do my pet. And we won't go through all of these. I'll just prove that it's working. My pet dot owner's name. So I got owner's name. I've got to have the dog name here. And then I'm going to add into it another environment dot new line. That gives a carriage return at the end of the statement. There's several ways to do this, by the way, folks. And then the last one, let's just do 3 of them. And the last one, let's do my pet dot address. And then we'll go ahead and close that out. Right there. Make sure no errors in there. Let's just prove it's working. So I've got owner name, dog name, and address. So those are the first 3 text boxes. So let's just go ahead and fill those in and prove it. So owner name is Tom Affolter. Pet name is Reagan. And my address is 123 Main Street. Okay, go ahead and click add. Now let's go. I'm going to have to go back and do that again. So that is text box 6. And that text box 6 is that guy right there. So we have to fill that one in. Reagan, 123 Main, and his license number is 12345. Click add. Okay, it did it. We have a stop there, so let's continue it running. Now let's click show. And there you go. So it showed you how we could put that information in. May not be overly impressive now because we've got really simple data, but if you've got a website and people are buying products and then you have to pass them over to another site, to another page, you need to pass that data. This is great. This really works well too with a website. Let me go ahead and open up a web page and show you how that might otherwise work. In this next demonstration, I created a web form application. This course does not cover this technology, so I'm not going to dwell too much on it, but it demonstrates that reusability of the class, such as my pets POD that we created. I've completed much of this basic design in advance, and I'll explain a little bit as we go along. I'm using C# to design this very basic website. Before I continue, this technology soon is going to be deprecated by Microsoft. They're going to now focus on another form of website development called MVC, which Microsoft has been pushing for several years now. We'll save that for a future class. But nonetheless, the focus of this demonstration is the reusability of my pets class. So let's take a look at this application that I have on the screen here. So it looks very similar to a desktop application. In fact, I can drag and drop onto my form. The big difference is you'll notice now that I have my basic screen design, but I've got 3 different tabs now that I can take a look at. Really the 2 that are most important will be the design and the source. Since I'm doing a web application, I'm doing drag and drop. Rather than it generating the C# code for me, what it's doing in many cases is it's creating for me the HTML code. And you'll see now that we have the basic HTML setup code within this, which again, I'm not going to dwell on too much. We have the different controls that were created. You'll see that there's breaks in here. ASP, Microsoft's version, uses web forms just a little bit different, not dramatically different, but a little bit different than you'd find out in a standard HTML web form. But you see as we go down through here, we have a body, we have an opening form tag, we have a div in here, we have all the controls, we have a closing div, a closing form, and then we have the closing HTML tags. I'm in source, I'm going to go back to design, and there's my basic form. You see that I can click on any of these elements. Just as before, those elements have properties available, and they also have event handlers available too. You'll find not as many event handlers exist in a web page as what you would find in a desktop application, but that's because the browser environment has restrictions, and it also has capabilities that can be used in its behalf. But again, that's not the focus of this class. Let's look at the other page that I have put together, as I just mentioned a minute ago, and that is the receipt page. So I've got this default page that we're going to fill information in, and then you hit the submit button. And what I wanted to do is to take this information, fill in my POD, then rather than having to send across 7 different pieces of information, I'm going to send that one POD reference across. I'm going to capture it in the receipt page, and I hope then, if everything works correctly, to display that information back in these labels. And it should just take a couple of moments for us to create this application to make it work. So let's jump back over and take a look at what we have to do. I'm going to go back to my default page here. And before I go on, you'll notice I've accidentally a couple times jumped to my code behind, and it looks very similar to what we would have in a desktop application. In fact, if I'm in this page and I do a right click over here, I can view my code, and I can jump back into the code behind, and we have a page load event handler just like we have in a desktop application. Let's run this application real quickly just to see what it's going to look like. So I'm going to run it in Google Chrome. It's going to open up in one of my other windows, so I'll have to drag it across here. And here's my basic form right now. Doesn't do anything fancy, but I can fill information in, and I have a submit button that right now does absolutely nothing. So let's come back over and code this real quickly here to make it work. First thing I want to do is I need to add a reference. Let me stop my application from running here. I'm going to add in a reference, just like we did on the desktop application. The reference is the DLL that I need to add in. So I'm going to click Add Reference here. And because this is the same computer, and we're going to talk about this in a couple of minutes, this is the same computer in which I previously created an application to use that pets DLL. It will remember that the pets DLL is here and where that location is, and all I've got to do is select it at this point. But let's assume that it wasn't available. I then would go back to Browse. I'd find my application, which it took me to directly, and I would simply select that DLL, and then I add it in, just like we did the desktop application. Now it's selected, and I click OK, and there it is. It's added right here. So I have access to that DLL. So now the work is going to go behind the submit button. We're going to fill this information out, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time right now doing any kind of validation at all. We're here strictly to focus on this pets DLL here to see how it works. And again, you're going to find out it works pretty much the same way, although how I pass information is a little bit different on a web page. You'll get to see that. Let's take a look here. So let's go to the button, and I'm going to double click on the button just like we do on a desktop app. It's going to create my event handler for my submit button. And again, it looks just like you have a desktop application. And I'm going to have to do what I did before. Even though I've got, well, actually at this point I can do my pets right in here, because the pets is going to receive the information. I don't have to do it as a class level as I did before. At this point, I'm going to receive the information, and I'm going to pass it to that receipt page. In the first example, I pass it to the same page, so I need to have access to it in different event handlers, so I declare the object up here at the class level. Now, I'm going to declare the object here. I'm going to read the object from the text boxes, just like we did in a desktop app, and then I'm going to send it to that receipt page. So let's see if we can make this work. So, number one, I have to instantiate that object. And it tells me over here that the name of it is pet, so I'm just going to type in pets, as we did before, and hit my period, and there's my pet's info right there. That's what I want. Next thing I need to do is give it a name that I want to call it. So I'm instantiating the object right now, at least the memory of that object, as we talked about previously. So at this point, I'm going to call it my pets, call it anything, is equal to. Now this is where I have to go back in and put new, and notice IntelliSense brings it up for me. And just a reminder, this sets aside the memory. This copies all the properties and methods into this myPets object, so I can use it with the properties and methods that we've created. So now if I type in myPets dot, I have all that same information that we had before. So I'm going to do the same thing we did before. I'm going to start at the very top of this, and I'm going to start with owner name. I'm going to say pets.ownerName is equal to what's in the text box, owner.text. Should look pretty doggone familiar to you here. Oops. And that's the one thing I don't like about this, is it doesn't default TE to text. Okay, and I'm just going to work down the line here. My pets dot address is equal to text address dot text. And by the power of the computer, I'm going to pause and have this created automatically for us. So by the power of video, everything is filled in, and you should notice that this is almost identical. In fact, it is identical to what we did on the desktop application. You'll see that all the way down, I created the original object. I've instantiated the text box into that specific object, my pets, and the same thing held true down on the previous example that holds true here, and that is that my pets.license is an integer. So for me to be able to plug in what's in that text box, text license, into that, I need to go ahead and cast it to an integer. So now I've got this object created, and what I want to do now, and this is going to be a little bit different than what we did on the desktop application, is I need to pass that over to my receipt page. So the very first thing I need to do is I need to create what we call a session variable. So I got a session variable, and I give it a name. So this is a way of virtualizing the information. I'm going to call it pet info. And basically what this is doing, without going too deep into it, is it's taking and copying to a file on my server all this pet information. When we do a desktop application, oftentimes I can pass that information across through memory. But because websites are set up so that one web page is not aware of the previous web page, I have to pass the information back and forth for the browser to accept it. So I'm going to go ahead and say that this session information called pet info now is going to be equal to my pets. Just like that. And as soon as I do that, you see everything seems to work okay. Now what I want to do is I need to call up my receipt page. So I'm going to do a response dot redirect, and then inside the parentheses here I need to tell it the web page that I'm going to go to. So I'm going to go to receipts. Excuse me here, I want to make it just right. Receipt.aspx. Now you'll notice that in the Microsoft world, the web pages don't end in HTML or HTML, they end in ASPX, and the reason is that the ASPX page is read by the web server. It then converts all of this information as it needs to into HTML, and then it converts it back to the HTML file that it recognizes. So it happens, it's the magic behind the scenes that you'll learn about a little bit later. So now I've got this information, I've written it to my basically a cookie, and I'm going to come now to my receipt page over here, and let's take a look at the code on the receipt page. So on the receipt page, when the page loads, I need to receive that same information. So the very first thing I need to do is to recreate this pets object just like we did before. So I'm going to do pets dot pet info, and I'll call it the same thing, my pet info is equal to new pet info. Just like that. Now the next thing I have to do is I've got to read that session variable back in to my pet info. I've got to take all that information I just passed and capture it again. So now I'm going to say my pet info is equal to, and the first thing I'm going to do is read that session variable. And that session variable, I've got to go back and take a look at it. I called pet info. So I'm going to go back to my receipt page. I'm going to receive now my pet info information. So I do session, and it's just like I did before, pet info. Just like that. Now the challenge that I have is that pet info, when it's written as a session variable, is not written as the object. Basically what it does, folks, is it writes as just a glob of data. So I'm receiving back this glob of unorganized data, and it's trying to plug it into my pet info, and it can't do that. So here's where an interesting method for casting comes in. We've done this once before when we did it from perhaps double an integer. But what I want to do is I want to read this information right here, and I want to cast it back into pet info as it comes across, just like that. And let me see here. And rather, I can't use pet info here, I need to use the actual object type. So let me correct this here, paste this in. So now what it's telling it is read the gobbledygook information that was stored in this session, reorganize it as pet info before you move it into my pet info. And there you go. At that point I should have all the objects out, and now I've got these text boxes within this receipt page. So I've got label owner. Let's just do that first one. So now I can say take label owner label owner dot text is equal to, let's try that again, is equal to, and now I've got my pet info already populated. I can say the exact opposite of what I did before. Move from pet info the owner's name, just like that, back into that particular label. So let me jump ahead and complete all this information. We'll take a look at it. So I've completed the basic form. I instantiate the object right here. I move the session variable back into pet info, so that's the class right there that contains all that information. I now break it apart. I plug it from that object into the respective labels all the way down. At the very bottom, remember that my petinfo.license is of type integer, so for me to move it into this text object here, I have to do a toString. Otherwise, I will get a casting error on it. Right there, it tells me I can't go from a int into a string. So let's put that back in, and let's test this out and make sure that's going to work. So I'm going to go back to my default web page right here, and I'm going to run the application. So let me fill it in. Dog name is Reagan, R-E-A-G-A-N, and his license number is 123. So when I hit the submit button, it should populate this into the object, call the second page, and simply show me that same information on the receipt page. Let's see if it's going to work. And there we go. Everything filled out correctly, and it shows you how, again, I was able to use that Pets DLL in a desktop application so far and in a web application. Here's a third example of using that Pets object, and I'm using a console application this time. So what I did is I went back into my references, I did a right click just as before, I added in Pets. So you see Pets has been added in. Then in my code, I instantiate an object called myPet of type pets info, just like we did in the two previous examples. This time, rather than having a form, which I don't have in a console application, I went ahead and populated that my pet object with information, as you see right here. And notice on the bottom here, I didn't cast it. Why? Because I'm plugging in an integer now directly into the license. If I point to license, you notice it says it's an integer. So once I get everything populated here, next thing I do is I've created a method called printPets. So I'm going to call printPets, and I'm going to pass it my pet object that's already been populated. So here is the printPets down here. It receives the argument, and I'm renaming it your pet. Now when I receive it, I have to instantiate it, kind of just like that session variable we talked about a minute ago. I receive the information over here in this method, so I have to tell it it's of type pets.petinfo. The moment I receive that, now I can parse that and break it apart. So I'm doing a console.writeLine, the owner's name, so it should print out Tom, and it should print out the address, etc. down the line. And of course, at the very bottom here, because I'm doing a write line, it's looking for text, I have to take that license here and do a toString on it. And at the very bottom, so that I can see the console screen so it just doesn't disappear when it writes that information out, I put a read key in here to pause it. Let's just take a look at this. You see down the line I've got all that information, so it shows you that I can read any one of these type projects. I can read a class into it, and it doesn't matter whether it's a web app, it doesn't matter whether it's a desktop app, a console app, and in fact it doesn't even matter which language it was created in. I could take this same DLL that I created, this printPets, and had it had C# code in it, I could incorporate that into a VB app. Or if I had created the DLL in a VB, I could incorporate it into C# or C++. It doesn't care, because once it's compiled, it's just ones and zeros. It doesn't really maintain that direct relationship between the language that created it. It's just there to be used. Now I want to show you another really cool feature here. I'm going to close this out, stop the application here. There's a relationship that is maintained between that class it's created and the application that is using it. If the class was created within the same domain, and the application that you're writing that uses that class sees the code that that class used to create, there's a special relationship between it. Now, before I go on, let me explain something else. When I went back in here and I added in this pets DLL here, it didn't actually physically move the pets DLL into my application as you would expect. Not in this particular case. And the reason is that it knows that pets is also in the same computer environment. Had I sent you a DLL and only the DLL, and you incorporated that DLL into your program, it would have actually brought that physical DLL in, because it would not have seen that that DLL belongs to another program that's being written. Let me explain what the advantage to that is. First thing I want to do is I'm going to jump back over. I've got that pets object open, so let's jump back over to it here. So here's my pets object right here. And let's assume that we need to add one more piece of information in here. What I don't have is I don't have the pet name. So I'm going to go ahead and simply add a pet name. I'm going to do it the quick way. Rather than using the editor, I'm just going to grab this information here. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to come down below this closing bracket here. I'm going to paste that same code in. It's going to give me an error telling me that breed already exists, and I'm just going to simply change that to pet name. Oops, let me try that again. Pet name. And I'm going to assume that pet name already exists. We'll have to come back in and create that up above again. And then down below here, I'm going to return pet name. We'll go back up to the top here, and we'll create that pet name. Private string pet name. Should take care of those errors down below. So now what we've done is we've actually added, let's see what I did. I better put in equal value here. So what we've did is we've extended out, where's my pet name? Pet name equals value, pet name, bracket, semicolon there. And how come I've got this and not working here? Let's, capital N. Just like that. And there we go. There's our corrections. Now I'm going to go ahead and rebuild this. It's going to create a new DLL. So let's go ahead and do a build. It's recreated a new DLL called Pets DLL. Now I'm going to go back to that other application that we created, and one of two things could have happened, folks. Number one is it now at this moment knows that there was a change made to the underlying DLL because it's on the same computer, it's in my same environment, I'm the editor of it. Had it not been able to create that relationship immediately, it would have put a yellow exclamation point right next to pets here, which said that pets needed to be updated. All you got to do, folks, when that happens, if it happens, is simply click on it. Once you click on it, that will update it. It's all it takes to update. But now let's come back over here and take a look at what happens with my pets. This is the advantage. Let's do my pets dot pet name. You'll see I now have that new object immediately in here. I didn't have to do anything else. I didn't have to re-import pets again. It knew because it was on the same computer. And part of the reason is that this pets object right here isn't physically in my project right now. It's a reference. It's actually pointing to that other project. It's pointing to this project right here and grabbing it out. So anytime a change is made here, it's automatically going to be reflected over here, and that's only again because they're on the same computer or in the same environment. Okay, so let's come back over here and make a couple of corrections here just to make sure this is working. So my pet name, I've got DogName over here already, so that was kind of a defeated purpose. So I'm just going to prove that this works. I don't know why I did that one. We'll put Bowser over here. And we'll come back down here and we'll do the same thing. We'll do a console.writeLine. And again, it should be received with your pet as well. So if I do your pet dot, I'm going to find now that I have pet name in here. And let's rerun this guy. And there it is, Bowser was included. So you see that immediate relationship. But let me show you one of the possibilities that might come up. Oftentimes you're going to buy these DLLs, or you're going to download these DLLs, or somebody's going to give you their DLL that they designed, and the moment that they give you that physical DLL, you can use it, but you cannot modify it at all. So an example of that might be, let's come back over here. I'm going to go into my file manager here. I'm going to go back into my pets object over here. I'm going to go deep into here, into my bin, my debug folder, and I'm going to grab that pets DLL right now. I'm going to copy him right there, and I'm going to now paste him someplace other than in this area, because this is where it's looking for it. So I'm going to come right back in, probably right here at my documents folder. I'm just going to paste him down below here. So he's going to be down at the bottom. Now I'm going to come back out here, and I'm going to delete out this pets right here. Going to get rid of him. I lost the reference. I should get errors that appear over here if I try to build, because the pets information now doesn't exist. It's just going to give me errors here. These guys don't exist. I'm going to add them back in. But this time I'm going to add in that reference that is located right here in projects. It's now detached from the original project that was created, and there's my pets DLL right there. And I can add him in here. Click OK, and now I can run him, and he works fine. Going to work just like he did before, but the difference we're going to find, folks, is there's not that direct relationship. If I was to go back now, and I was going to modify this original pets, say that I went back in here and I deleted out pet's name right here, my application on either end would not know that that was done. I would have to rebuild this application and recopy that DLL, give it to that person, and let them re-import it. That's a great thing, though. It's a great advantage, because what it means is that you can hand out your DLL and give it to anybody. They can use it but not see what's inside of it. They can't modify anything on that DLL, not the way we think of modifying it anyway.